There is one number in the entire Bible that has fascinated Christians for centuries. 144,000. To some, they are a literal group chosen by God. To others, they are symbolic. Some believe they are Jewish evangelists during the tribulation. Others believe they represent the complete people of God. But what if the biggest mystery isn't who the 144,000 are? What if it's why they are described the way they are? Because hidden inside the Book of Revelation is a description that has puzzled readers for nearly 2,000 years. These are the ones who have not defiled themselves with women, for they are virgins. Why would that matter? Why would purity become the defining characteristic of this mysterious group? At first glance, it seems like an odd detail. Almost out of place. Until another ancient book enters the conversation. A book older than the New Testament. A book quoted in the Epistle of Jude. A book that shaped the beliefs of many Jews living before the time of Jesus. The Book of Enoch. Today, many people claim Enoch reveals the true identity of the 144,000. Others insist that connection never existed. So, who's right? Before we answer that, we need to clear away one of the biggest misconceptions on the internet. Because despite thousands of videos, the Book of Enoch never actually contains the number 144,000. Not once. So why do so many people connect the two books? The answer isn't found in a number. It's found in a story. A story about heavenly beings, forbidden corruption, and a generation that refused to compromise. That story begins long before Revelation. Long before John received his visions on Patmos. It begins in one of the oldest Jewish writings ever preserved. And if that connection is real, it changes how many people read Revelation forever. But before we open Enoch, there's another question almost nobody asks. If Revelation was written in the 1st century, why does it contain so many ideas that seem strangely familiar to readers of Enoch? Coincidence? Shared tradition? Or something much deeper? Tonight, we're following the evidence. Not assumptions. Not traditions. Not internet theories. We'll compare the ancient texts themselves. We'll separate what Enoch actually says from what people claim it says. And by the end, you'll understand why this ancient book continues to ignite one of the biggest debates in biblical history. Because the truth may be very different from what either side expects. Let's begin with the claim itself. If you search online for Enoch and the 144,000, you'll quickly find videos, blogs, and social media posts confidently declaring that the Book of Enoch reveals who the 144,000 really are. Some even claim Enoch contains the original list. Others insist Revelation borrowed the entire idea from Enoch. It's an extraordinary claim. But does the ancient text actually say that? The answer may surprise you. If you read 1 Enoch from beginning to end, you will never encounter the number 144,000. Not in the Book of the Watchers. Not in the Similitudes. Not in the Astronomical Book. Not in the Dream Visions. Not in the Epistle of Enoch. The number simply isn't there. So why has this connection become so widespread? Because many people are connecting themes, not numbers. And that's an important distinction. The Book of Revelation introduces a mysterious group described in remarkable terms. They stand with the Lamb on Mount Zion. God's name is written on their foreheads. They are described as blameless, faithful, and untouched by corruption. Now compare that to one of the central themes running through the Book of Enoch. Again and again, Enoch describes two kinds of humanity: those who remain faithful to God, and those who become corrupted, not merely through sinful behavior, but through accepting forbidden knowledge. Knowledge that, according to Enoch, was never meant for humanity. This story begins with the Watchers, heavenly beings entrusted with authority. Instead of remaining faithful, they crossed a boundary. They descended to earth, took human wives, and taught humanity practices that Enoch portrays as corrupting civilization. Weapons, sorcery, enchantments, astrology used for forbidden purposes, cosmetics designed to manipulate appearance. The problem wasn't simply knowledge itself. It was knowledge divorced from obedience to God. Knowledge without wisdom. Power without righteousness. And that's where many readers begin seeing a possible connection. When Revelation describes the 144,000 as remaining pure, some scholars suggest that description deliberately echoes an older Jewish tradition. A tradition in which God's faithful people refused the corruption introduced by the Watchers. Notice something important. That isn't the same as saying Revelation is quoting Enoch. Nor does it prove the 144,000 are the exact same group. It simply means John may be drawing on ideas that his earliest readers already understood. And if that's true, the phrase, "they were not defiled," may carry far more meaning than most modern readers realize. But before we can understand that possibility, we need to answer another question. Who exactly were the Watchers? And why did ancient Jewish writers believe their rebellion changed human history forever? Because without understanding the Watchers, the rest of the mystery remains hidden. Before anyone can claim to understand the 144,000, there's one rule we have to follow. Read the text. Not our assumptions. Not tradition. Not internet theories. The text itself. The first mention of the 144,000 appears in Revelation chapter 7. John writes that before God's judgments continue, "For angels stand at the four corners of the earth." Another angel appears carrying the seal of the living God. And then something unusual happens. The judgments are delayed. Not forever, but until another task is complete. A group of servants must first be sealed. John then hears their number. 144,000. 12,000 from each of the 12 tribes of Israel. Immediately, questions begin to emerge. Is John describing literal tribes? A symbolic picture? Or something both theological and prophetic? Christians have debated those questions for centuries. But regardless of where someone stands, one detail often receives surprisingly little attention. John hears the number before he sees the multitude. Moments later, he looks. And instead of describing only the 144,000, he suddenly sees a great multitude that no one could number. People from every nation, every tribe, everyone, every language, standing before the throne, wearing white robes, holding palm branches, praising God. Some scholars see these as two completely different groups. Others believe John follows a literary pattern that appears elsewhere in Revelation. He hears one thing, then sees another perspective of the same reality. The debate continues. But then Revelation returns to the 144,000 in chapter 14. And this is where the language becomes especially intriguing. John sees the Lamb standing on Mount Zion. With him, 144,000. His Father's name is written on their foreheads. They sing a song that no one else can learn. They are described as firstfruits to God. They follow the Lamb wherever he goes. And then comes the line that has sparked countless debates. These are the ones who have not defiled themselves with women, for they are virgins. For centuries, readers have struggled with those words. Are they describing literal celibacy? Symbolic faithfulness? Or something else entirely? The text doesn't stop to explain. John simply moves on. And that silence has invited centuries of interpretation. But here's where the conversation becomes fascinating. Because when first-century Jewish readers encountered language about purity, corruption, and remaining undefiled, many of them already knew another book that used remarkably similar themes. Not Revelation. Enoch. Could that shared language be intentional? Or are modern readers connecting dots that the ancient authors never intended? To answer that, we need to compare the two books, side by side. Not through speculation, but through the words they actually use. After everything we've explored, we're left with one final question. Who are the 144,000? Surprisingly, the Book of Enoch never gives us that answer directly. It never lists them. It never names them. It never mentions the number itself. What it gives us instead is a world. A worldview. A picture of what faithfulness looks like when corruption surrounds you. By the time John wrote the Book of Revelation, that picture was already familiar to many Jewish readers. They had read Daniel. They knew the prophets. Many were also familiar with writings like 1 Enoch. Whether those books were considered scripture or respected religious literature, they formed part of the intellectual and spiritual landscape of the Second Temple period. That doesn't mean every reader accepted Enoch. Nor does it mean Revelation depends upon it. But it does mean John's audience lived in a world where these ideas were already being discussed. A world filled with expectations about divine judgment, faithful remnant, heavenly rebellion, and God's final victory. When John describes the 144,000, he doesn't spend much time explaining who they are. Instead, he tells us how they live. They belong to God. They remain faithful. They refuse compromise. They follow the Lamb wherever he goes. Whether someone believes that number is literal or symbolic, those characteristics remain unchanged. That may explain why Christians across many different traditions have interpreted the passage differently for centuries. Some see a future group during the final tribulation. Others see the faithful people of God represented symbolically. Still others understand the imagery through the lens of apocalyptic literature. The debate continues. And perhaps that's exactly why Revelation was written the way it was. Not to satisfy every curiosity, but to call believers to perseverance. The Book of Enoch reaches a remarkably similar conclusion. Again and again, the righteous endure. The wicked prosper only for a season. Judgment belongs to God. Faithfulness belongs to his people. Whether or not one believes Revelation intentionally echoes Enoch, both books ultimately point in the same direction. Not toward secret knowledge. Not toward hidden codes. but toward steadfast faithfulness in a corrupt world. And maybe that is the lesson modern readers need most. Because every generation believes it lives in confusing times. Every generation faces pressure to compromise. Every generation must decide who it will follow. The identity of the 144,000 has inspired debate for centuries. Perhaps it will continue to do so. But Revelation places its greatest emphasis somewhere else. Not on satisfying our curiosity, but on remaining faithful to the one standing on Mount Zion. That is where the vision ends. And perhaps that is exactly where our own reflection should begin. What do you think? Did John intentionally draw from ideas that readers already knew through writings like the Book of Enoch? Or are the similarities simply the result of a shared Jewish tradition that shaped both books? I'd genuinely like to hear your perspective. Share your thoughts in the comments, and if you enjoyed this exploration of ancient texts and biblical history, consider subscribing for more in-depth documentaries. Thank you for watching.